It's a great pleasure to present. Although I will say it's a shame for me personally that I can't be there with you all, old friends and new friends and colleagues. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to TRB this year, and I definitely miss the camaraderie and the lunch that you're sharing. And hope everyone's having a good time down there in DC. Welcome the opportunity to present today. Thanks for it. I'm going to talk about still very much a work in progress that we've called justice-centered healthy mobilities. That's sort of a very specific, purposeful title. I'll talk a little bit about why. This is really a work in progress. I hope to keep as much as time as possible to get your inputs and ideas and precedents and so forth. And again, thanks for your all attention. But before we begin, I just wanted to, as detailed in this land acknowledgement, I just wanted to acknowledge that the research for this project and the land upon which I'm currently presenting from today are traditional unceded territories of the Wampanoag Nation and the Massachusetts people. And in fact, MIT profited from land sales that were granted by the Morrill Act here in the United States in 1862. And our own efforts as a department here from the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT aim to repair these past injustices, not only in our department, but in our university and the broader field. This land acknowledgement, obviously, that details that and more, provides more details on that. Today I just wanted to give a quick background and motivation for the work that I'll present, including some inspiration for that work, where we currently stand, where we're trying to go, and then really hopefully we can spend some time at the end with some ideas from you all and your expertise and your experiences and your exposure to different projects that might help inform us. I think it goes without saying, I'm speaking to an audience that know this better than I do. But the major problems that we're facing in our urban areas today, especially those that are mobility related, are, for me personally, a very important historical motivation. We know, and we've heard a lot about today, the problems and the challenges of ongoing growth in greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, traffic safety, equity, exclusion, etc. And personally, I've been studying these together with many of you for my entire professional career. I've had the honor of working with many of you for almost that entire professional career. And yet, without being overly pessimistic, it seems we're often getting worse, not better, on many of these dimensions. Not all of them, but many. And I would say particularly climate, goes without saying, and arguably equity. Although, I think it depends on how we define that. Most of my career I've spent working on better means of data collection, better ways of modeling behavior, better specifications of those models, estimations of those models, simulation tools, approaches and applications, et cetera, et cetera. And over time, it's gotten me wondering, as I'm in the approaching the twilight of my career, wondering, am I missing something, right? The problems keep seemingly getting more challenging. We keep working harder and harder. And, if you take that definition of crazy, trying the same thing over and over again with just fancier tools. So in more recent years, I returned to an early motivation in my career, which was this desire to try to, how do we increase public participation in the planning of mobility and transportation? Of course, it goes without saying, transport planning has a long history of trying to increase participation, and yet these still face a number of challenges. Transport's a technocratic planning endeavor. Most of us, participate in some dimension of that. And when we think about participation in planning, we can often just imagine how daunting this is because of the technical sophistication. There's also, just procedural complexity, right? Here's just a textbook version of transportation system analysis. So this can be quite complex, especially when we try to involve the public, right? Which can become quite boring. This is a slide I've used before. Some of you have probably seen it. This is a sort of a typical planning process for public engagement process for transport planning. It tends to be pretty static, unidirectional, pretty dry and superficial. Co-creation opportunities are often missed. But we have higher expectations. And I would argue that without really meaningful engagement, our projects generate resentment, opposition, and anger. And almost all of us have experienced this. Whether it's trying to find a new BRT corridor, reform paratransit, et cetera, et cetera. In the last 10 to 15 years, working together with some of you, with many students and other researchers, we embarked on projects that aim to bring the power of technology and the technological advances to this question of can we improve public participation and public engagement. This includes new tools that are interactive that can, in theory, increase public engagement in planning transit networks. Anson was intimately involved in this. Christo Venter deployed this in a pilot form in Pretoria. We've done it in Cambridge. We've some from the Católica partners and those from La Concepción did this in Chile, et cetera, et cetera. We've generated various types of smartphone app programming tools, and many of you as well, to try to make it easier to collect data, to map transit networks that we did in Dhaka, and colleagues have done in Africa, and now kind of is a global phenomena, doing street walkability audits, et cetera, et cetera. We even tried to use some very more sophisticated smartphone technologies to try to do real-time feedback on people's greenhouse gas footprints and get this as a way for them to motivate to change their behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. For us as a researcher, this is certainly interesting, right? And, and it's fun, and we think it's worthwhile. It's a good learning experience, and, we get some papers out of it, which is important for us in terms of professional development. But, to me, they begin in reflection to raise some concerns. Again, another cliche as well. If you have a hammer, I got a technology, everything looks like it's a technological problem, right? So here's a borrowed image. And in fact, I would say, given I'm from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, maybe we're biased in this direction. Technology is the solution. But more importantly, I might argue, is they raise to me some questions about academic and scholarly extraction. I'm not speaking for anyone else here, but I would say I face this in many dimensions of my work. This could even include field-based community-focused classes, right, which we call here in our department practicum. This has, in fact, long been a criticism of academia and its relationships with marginalized communities, including at MIT. This is exemplified in this image from the Black Dust thesis, which a group of Black students and allies submitted to the department in summer of 2020, right? This is from 1968, and you could, the language might be a little outdated for those that for English is the first language, but but it still resonates in my view. Again, this is motivation, but some inspiration then comes from my colleague Mariana Arcaya, who has for many years been leading an initiative. She's a public epidemiologist. Which is called the Healthy Neighborhood Study. The Healthy Neighborhood Study now is the Healthy Neighborhoods Consortium, which is centered on the network of resident researchers. This is work that our colleague Lake Zegras has also been working on, applying the concept and the approach of participatory action research. In this case, residents of the study, communities with varying levels of education and formal research experience, work in collaboration with academics, nonprofits, public agency partners to design study protocols, data collection approaches, collect the data, analyze the data, and act on that data locally. The research work is pathbreaking in my view. In fact, in the early days of the COVID pandemic, they actually were able to predict where evictions would take place in the greater Boston area because they knew exactly, or with great amount of detail, where the most problematic potential cases, both of COVID and where, for example, crowded housing and housing precarity existed. But they've also developed a research infrastructure that they've been building out to help this type of research happen. This includes model protocols, institutional review boards, inter-organization research agreements, new funding models, et cetera. There's both a research infrastructure that they're building to enable this work, and also the methods that they're developing and deploying and making available to others are highly important, and I would say quite valuable. And I would ask, suggest anyone who's interested, you can go if you just Google Healthy Neighborhood Study, you'll find a wealth of information available and resources available, including open data available from this work. And then another source of inspiration, and this was presented a few years ago at the Assembly, some of you might remember. This was in response to the murder of George Floyd and our own nation's racial reckoning. Some members of our community organized into the Racially Just Research Initiative, which was designed to help develop principles by which planning and other allied fields can be explicitly racially just in their research practices. The first findings of this work was published at the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture, and I won't get into it in too much detail, but basically they identify 10 working tenets. Now this is a work in progress, and I encourage all of you to look at this and see how this might influence the work that you do, irrespective of the nature of that work, and because these are the tenets that we have aimed to embrace in the work that we are embarking, that we call justice-centered health and mobilities. I mean, quite quickly, it means developing an explicit theory of change, including a theory of racialized difference. The work should be moving towards reconciliation, reparation. We heard this in Anson's presentation earlier, that we acknowledge racial structures or other structures of discrimination and marginalization that exist. Be transparent in all aspects of work. Make sure history and context play a fundamental role in understanding how the work should be done. The specific access of community should be uplifted. And then, of course, how do we protect human subjects, focus on developing the leadership, centering the leadership and developing the leadership in those marginalized communities, and then consistently invite critique and reflection. So again, these are some basic tenets. I've grossly simplified them here. But I encourage you to look at the resources for those that are interested in applying this in your own work. So now I'll turn to what we're calling the justice-centered health and mobilities. This name emerged to be specific enough to encompass overall intended scope, but also broad enough to not predefine a specific technological or methodological focus a priori. Again, we're not arriving to a community saying, "Oh, we want to focus on healthy mobility," and we think public mobility is the solution. In fact, the community itself needs to be engaged in problem definition from the get-go. So to briefly give a brief history, we launched this effort at the start of the last academic year. We had 2 master's students, a PhD student, an undergraduate student, and a visiting fellow from Brazil, also a visiting PhD student from Barcelona. We've been really shoestringing this, to use a technical term. We've basically been a lot of people working with part-time and with very few resources that we've currently had to date. But you can see here the current team, and this is their own very brief and pithy personal theories of change. I'll pause for a second. I'm not going to read them. You can read them yourself. But this gives a flavor of what it is that each of these individuals aims to bring to this work from their own perspectives. So, as I said, we're basically a year and a half into the effort, and I'm going to give you a summary in a minute. I showed the personal theories of change on that prior slide. Our sort of working organizational theory of change is if we begin by building relationships and trust with community, then we have a chance to contribute to community-driven change, fulfilling community wishes and visions, and building the next generation of community leaders. So that's our working organizational or project-safe theory of change. We spent a lot of time unpacking that justice-centered healthy mobility. I won't get into any detail, but basically we're viewing justice in multiple dimensions, not just justice in terms of outcomes, such as, say, the distribution of resources, but procedural justice in terms of who actually has access to the processes of planning, and epistemic justice, which means everyone has equal knowledge, or the knowledge is of equal value, even though it's highly diverse in what's brought to the table. So if I know behavioral modeling, yeah, that's pretty valuable, but someone else who rides the bus every day, that value, the knowledge that they generate from that experience and their own experience of living in community is of equal value. We spent a lot of time reviewing participatory action research in transportation studies. I'd love it if others had ideas of what we might be missing. And we also then, in the greater Boston area, which is where we're working, we mapped mobility issues, drawing from the history of newspaper articles, recently, looking at relevant community organizations who might be interesting partners, and major transportation related projects. And then we identified candidate partner organizations. I won't belabor that too much, but this is sort of how we mapped projects, community organizations, as well as nonprofits. And by the end of by the start of last summer, we had identified about 50 initial potential partners. Each team member assessed those partners to judge the degree to which they would be potentially interested and interesting to work with. And then we arrived at 9, with which we then did more deep dive, and then we finalized 5. And these were based on the organizational qualities, their relevance and potential to grow together with us, and then looking at whether they were transport focused or health focused or environmentally focused or all of the above, as well as a mix of geographies: Northern Boston, South Boston, et cetera, et cetera. So through that process, we ended up arriving to the community of Mattapan, and a specific organization there called the Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition. I'll just, for those that don't know, I hope you can see my mouse here. So I am actually today dialing in from my condo over here in Cambridgeport. MIT is basically right here, and Mattapan, the Mattapan Square is right down here. This, in fact, is Blue Hill Avenue, which is a source of contention historically, because in fact there's been a long time proposal to improve bus transit there, including through bus rapid transit, with the community saying, don't take away our parking, don't take away our trees, stop coming here with your projects concocted in government offices without any consultation. Of course, that's a very crude, quick summary. So that's hopefully orients you a little bit to where we are. This is Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition, our current partner. They have a broad range of focus. They do food access, including they run a farmer's market. They work, they've done a lot on bicycle infrastructure planning. They have a youth empowerment program, and they have other programs to help enhance physical activity. It's primarily a woman-driven organization. The leadership is comprised of women from the community of Mattapan. And I will highlight, Mattapan is a neighborhood within Greater Boston. A neighborhood within the city of Boston. So it's not its own municipality, unlike Cambridge, which is a municipality adjacent to Boston. So, for example, for Santiago, you could imagine, while say Cambridge might be equivalent to Providencia and Santiago equivalent to Boston, you can imagine perhaps Mattapan being something like Bella Vista in the city of within the Santiago area. Anyway, so this was the scope that we initially drafted together with the Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition. I won't get into it too much, but basically I wanted to say, the commitment that DUSP has made is working to contribute and secure resources necessary to make this pilot partnership a success. And again, you can see that what our expectations were with respect to the partnership. Where we arrived, and this is where I would love to get some feedback from you, because we're in there kind of getting into the thick of it right now, is one of the programs that Mattapan Food and Fitness has is a youth development and transportation advocacy program. So we thought this was a great idea because basically it's working with high school students in an after-school enrichment program. And the idea is that we can engage and center the voices of this next generation, both the mobility users and potentially the next generation of transportation planners, who might, because they might learn and express interest in this. And then, also through this, spread the knowledge through the community in terms of understanding how, we all can work together to improve transportation and its problems. We spent October to December to try to build better relationships with our partner. And now we're starting to begin actually the curricular programming and do the curriculum in this coming northern winter into spring. So basically from January to May. And again, what we're trying to operationalize here are those racially just research principles, or those tenets that I outlined earlier. So I ran through that really quickly. I see my clock says I'm at 20 minutes. I understand I've already consumed it. So I'm going to stop there and, basically leave with that last question. Of course, I'm open to any questions that you might have for me, but what I'd much rather hear is from you. Do you have examples of initiatives that might be relevant from which we might learn? In fact, are any of you potentially interested in participating in some form in what we're trying to do? I'm happy to take follow-up offline through email if necessary, or use the time here to the degree that it's still available. And thank you for your patience in listening to me remotely and not being able to participate there. And hopefully the dynamic for interchange isn't too awkward given our differences in locations and time zones. So I'll pause there. And thanks again.
Thank you, Chris.